Hello, and welcome to another edition of Academic Matters. I'm Joe Marbach, the Provost here at LaSalle University. Today I'm joined by Dr. Elizabeth Cooper, who's an Associate Provost, I'm giving you a promotion, Associate Professor in the Department of Finance here in our School of Business. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your background and how you came to LaSalle.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Ohio, actually, and I decided to come to school in Philadelphia because I have a lot of family in the area. And I went to Villanova and had a great experience, and actually had a professor that told me, you know, maybe you should look into academia as a career. And I hadn't thought about it, to be honest. I had a job lined up at an investment bank in Manhattan, and my parents were very excited about that, and I got a nice briefcase and everything, and then I decided to go to grad school. Okay. And you know, I think they were a little disappointed. They thought they were going to have this investment banker daughter, and then, you know, I'm this poor graduate student. And so I went to Drexel for my MBA and PhD, and I ended up after that going to the University of San Diego, which I just wanted to live in California for a little bit, and that was fun. And but it was weird. I didn't think I'd be like this, but I actually missed the East Coast and my family and
change of weather.
Yeah, it was bizarre because I think I became the first person ever to move from San Diego back to Philadelphia. I had one of my professors from Drexel actually had connections at the Philadelphia Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank in Philadelphia, and said, you know, maybe you'd be a good candidate for this job that they have. So I just decided, you know, okay, I'll see what it's all about, and I interviewed, and so I ended up at the Fed for a couple of years, totally different from academics, but a really good experience. I did a lot with supervision. Okay, so I was a bank examiner, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, and I did more of, since I had a quantitative background, I did more of the models. I looked at their models of like credit default. So what is the likelihood of someone defaulting on a mortgage payment, for instance? So I would look at how banks modeled these types of
So they're measuring their risk. And
right. So retail risk was the
that
technical
having
term.
A reasonable
right, that they were modeling things correctly and reasonably. So I traveled all over the place, all over the country, going to all the large banks and looking at their credit models. And it was exciting and, you know, interesting work. It was a lot of traveling. And you know, it turned out that the professor that encouraged me originally from Villanova to go into academics had taught here at LaSalle. And he told me when there's a job opening here, and I said, you know, maybe I'll try for that. I didn't know much about LaSalle, to be honest. So yeah, that's how I came here. So I switched gears from, you know, academics to practical kind of work, and then back to academics.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does that transfer into the classroom? You know, because you've been, you know, as you said, going full cycle.
Yeah.
What's I mean, let me put it in a different way. What's different about what you were teaching in the way you approach teaching in San Diego versus what you do here at LaSalle, or is anything different?
No, it's definitely different, and I think part of it is the credibility issue, honestly. Going right from a graduate program to teaching, I knew all the theories inside and out. I knew all the research, but you know, if you haven't done some of the stuff, especially in business, I think it's different. The students kind of pick up on that, I think, and you know, you have more experience to draw from, right, for teaching. So, you know, when I talk about a certain concept, I can say, oh, you know, I saw this in a particular bank when I went there, and or, you know, certain regulations that come up. I have, you know, close knowledge about where those come from and how those transpire. So it's, you know, coming from practical background versus textbook background, I think makes a difference. And I think at some schools it wouldn't make a difference, but I think here it does make a difference, having that practical background really helps the students.
Yeah, is that a sense because is that the orientation of our curriculum, the orientation of our students?
I think it's a little of both. I think the practical nature of business in particular, a lot of students come here, particularly for MBA students, to get some practical knowledge. So let's learn something tonight that I can use tomorrow. And that's at least how I approach things. And that's how it seems that things are encouraged to be taught here, as opposed to purely from a theory perspective. So we do talk about theory, right? But of course, linking that to actual practice is a lot more, I think, fulfilling for the students.
And I think it is very consistent with the mission of LaSalle, the orientation of the Christian Brothers, dating back to when St. John Baptist de La Salle's taking kids off the streets of France to teach them a skill that they can go to work.
Yeah, I agree.
I think our students come here expecting that.
Right.
A lot of them are first generation at the undergraduate level. And I didn't know that the MBAs were quite as mercenary. Yeah.
Well, that's how I see it.
Yeah. How has your real world experience, because this isn't the real
This
world,
isn't real.
right?
Yeah, I always say that too.
Influenced your research?
Okay, well, before I went to the Fed, I was not a banker type person. I was more in the corporate finance field. So that in finance, there's a lot of different types of finance, right? So one side is a corporate kind of managerial finance side where everybody, all different companies need to know a little bit about how to raise money and what to do with it. Doesn't matter what industry you're in. So that was more my kind of research. And I would look at, things like maybe the board of directors. How does that influence the type of board? How does it influence decisions that the company makes on dividend policy or mergers or things like that? Now my research is much more focused on financial institutions. So I spent years at the Fed. I did a lot of research when I was there, and I've continued on with that today. So I went from kind of a corporate background to now a financial institutions side.
And within that kind of research, what are the types of things you're looking at?
I still look at corporate governance issues, but within financial institutions. So right now, for instance, I'm looking at mostly executive pay, in the banking industry. So in particular, we look at things like how pay is structured, how a CEO's pay is divided between cash payment versus equity payment, right? They get maybe stock warrants or restricted stock grants in addition to their salary and their bonus. So does it make a difference that they get more cash or more equity, right? And does that lead to any decision-making processes? So do banks that pay certain types of structures, are they taking on more risks, for instance?
Yeah, so in a way to try to increase the value of the stock of the company, so that...
Sure, yeah, the underlying theory is if we give executives equity in the firm, they're going to be more likely to work for the best interest of the shareholders, right? Because they'll be shareholders themselves. If we just pay them in in cash and salary and bonus, who knows? Maybe they're just going to do things that benefit themselves. They don't have to do anything that's lining up with the shareholders. So there's a whole side of research that goes into that, and that I do research in that area.
Yeah, that's interesting because we look at it from an opposite perspective, that even though they have ownership in the company, it's in their best interest to drive the stock price high, at least in the short term.
Okay, yeah.
And then if they got their price and then they sold,
yeah,
it's almost like it's almost akin to coaches betting on sports, and you think, well, it must be a good thing if they bet on their own team.
Right.
But if they have a star pitcher and you run your pitcher out and he's no good after, because you want him to win the game that you bet on,
right?
But for the whole season he might not.
I see what you're saying, and that's something that has been brought up a lot in from the financial crisis is one thing. Maybe we're incentivizing CEOs the wrong way, but the real goal is to do have long-term equity stakes in the firm. So
Okay.
instead of saying, okay, you get stock today, well, you can have these stock grants, but you can't exercise them, you can't use them until 3 or 5 or 10 years down the road.
Okay.
So you want to work for long-term shareholder value increases. So if you're the coach, you want to, you're betting for the 10 years down the road that your team is going to win.
The number of championships.
Yes,
Down there. And has your research borne that out? Does that seem to be a more effective way of?
Yeah. it's not as, that's the theory, right? But in reality, it's not that easy, and that's kind of the hard thing in business. There's so much noise, right? When you look at the data, I mean, we can look at and see, okay, if we're structuring compensation this way, what does that lead to? Well, there's so many other things that are happening that it's hard to say that this caused this. So you find mixed results. I find mixed results in terms of performance, and then I look a lot at risk taking. Okay, so do CEOs that have, and I don't just look at the structure of compensation. There's also a line of research now that looks at what's called the pay gap. So you have the executive, the top executive, the CEO.
Yeah.
What is his or her salary or total compensation in relation to his or her team of executives, so all the vice presidents, for instance. Is there a big gap in between those compensations, or is it very narrow? Okay, so it's a pay gap. So how does that influence how a bank or any other company takes risks? So there's different theories on that. But most of my research, I look at before the financial crisis versus after.
After, okay.
Because a lot changed because of the financial crisis. A lot of CEOs now take on less risk, just overall, no matter how their compensation is structured. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, and we can maybe talk about it in the second segment a little bit, because I guess there's also the element of the role of government in this.
Yeah, sure.
So we'll share that thought.
Okay.
We'll be right back. My guest is Dr. Elizabeth Cooper. She's associate professor in the Department of Finance here at LaSalle University. We'll follow up with this conversation in our next segment.
Hey fellow TV viewers, are you bored? Are you tired of the same old shows? Having thousands of channels to watch, but there's nothing there? Tired of sitting by yourself on your old mama's striped couch? Sitting in your room by yourself, watching someone who resembles your grandfather? Yeah, I know. I used to be just like you. By now, all hope is lost. You're flipping through channels, wondering what to watch. Boring, 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 boring. Wait, what's this? LaSalle TV. It's new, it's bold, it's great. It's not your ordinary TV.
I didn't think this could happen to me.
I just wanted to feel pretty.
I just put my drink down for a second.
I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to fight back.
Have you ever
had someone repeatedly put their hands on you even though you were saying no?
been threatened into an unwanted sexual activity? Each year, there are almost 300,000 victims of sexual assault,
Unwanted touching,
attempted rape, and committed rape
and even receiving sexually threatening messages.
are all forms of sexual assault.
Anyone can be a victim.
no matter the age, gender, or ethnicity. Take a stand.
Against sexual assault.
In LaSalle University's Communication Department, students learn to think and do.
Every semester, communication students create and implement public relations plans for local nonprofit organizations.
And journalism students produce Germantown Beat, an online news source for the local community.
It's great that we can apply what we learn in the classroom in our community.
Philadelphia is the nation's 4th largest media market and has 4 major sports teams.
Being in a major media market allows us to gain great professional experience through internships and co-ops.
The Communication Center is home to the university's cable station.
LaSalle TV reaches over 350,000 homes in Philadelphia and airs mostly student-produced programming.
Our communication department is ranked in the top 10 in North America for relational communication research.
But keeping with the tradition of the De La Salle Christian Brothers, teaching students comes first.
Think, do, with LaSalle Communication. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter.
Hello and welcome back to Academic Matters. I'm Joe Marbach, the provost here at LaSalle University. Again, I'm picking up the conversation with Dr. Liz Cooper, who is a professor of finance in our department, in our business school here. Liz, we left off, you were talking about executive compensation. More CEOs now in the finance industry are risk averse, or they're not looking at risk. What role has the government played in influencing that attitude?
Well, the financial institution is highly regulated, as we know. That's what makes it a whole different field in finance, because it looks different than all other industries. So we have so many regulatory agencies. I worked for the Fed, but there's a lot of different other regulatory agencies out there, and their whole mission is to protect the financial system, keep it stable, protect investors, depositors, right? And so since the financial crisis in particular, there's been, as we know, a lot of additional regulations. The Dodd-Frank Act in particular has really made this a bigger issue for, just everybody is more aware of
regulation. Can you explain that a little bit more for folks at home that might not be familiar with Dodd-Frank?
Okay, yeah, so it's regulation. It's a congressional act that is aimed at more protection for consumers particularly in the financial institution field. So just more regulation, basically, on how our money is protected.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of different layers to it. One in particular that's come up recently is what's called the Volcker Rule, something that stemmed from a former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker, and basically saying maybe we should separate any of the interests of commercial banks from investment banks. So right now, if you're a commercial bank, you can do activities that investment banks do, riskier type activities.
Okay.
Right, and now we're saying, well, maybe that was a real problem, and maybe that was part of the cause of the financial crisis, and maybe
so
we
at
should
one point they were separated,
them.
And then we let them merge again.
Yes.
And now it's rethinking.
Well, they
allowing
were
them to
separated, then they merged. So under what's called the Glass-Steagall Act, and then they separated again. So and since then, though, they were able to, a commercial bank could act as an investment bank, and now we're talking about maybe we should separate them again. Yeah. So there's been a lot of additional regulations, and of course that's going to have an influence on, anything that the bank does or anything that a financial institution does. Do they decide to merge with another company, or do they decide to pay their shareholders a dividend, or do they decide to do risky type derivative trading for their own profit as opposed to hedging? These are the kind of things that regulators are struggling with today.
Okay. In addition to executive compensation, you said you're
Mhm.
also doing some work with social responsibility.
Yeah.
Where's that taking you, and are corporations being more socially responsible?
I don't know, but I do know that it does, the companies that are more socially responsible, have more corporate social responsibility, do things differently than companies that are not rated as highly in these types of scales.
How do you measure social responsibility? Is there a standard, or is it something you're developing?
No, I don't develop. I didn't develop it, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. I like to use kind of hard data that has been proven to people use it in other research, looking at different aspects of corporate social responsibility. In particular, we have a database here that looks at over a 20-year period, lots of different companies, 3,000 or so, looking at all different aspects of corporate social responsibility and ranking them and scoring companies on these different
like
metrics.
Investment in the community, education of individuals,
there's
involvement in local
a lot
boards?
of things. So yeah, environmental issues, diversity issues, employees, customers. So all these different layers. I mean, there's no. It's hard. It's a hard area because it's a soft area, right? Because there's so many different aspects that could be called corporate social responsibility. So what this database does is kind of give us a broad array of different aspects, and we can kind of put them all together to see kind of what a total score would be for companies. So it's not a perfect measure, but there's really not a perfect measure for a lot of things in business. And but this is one way, at least, to look at some subjective data in a quantitative way. So I'm looking at, with a couple co-authors, I still work with people at the Fed actually, and we're looking at banks that received TARP funding, which is the Troubled Asset Relief Program. So a lot of people, this is like a bad word to a lot of people, right? It's the bailout. But a lot of banks receive funding from the government after the crisis, and since have paid it back for the most part. But we're looking at, banks that were considered more socially responsible. Do they pay back those funds faster, or were they in the first place not as likely to need the funds, right? So kind of looking over time, looking how these things change.
Why would a socially responsible bank not necessarily need it? Is it because they would not have taken riskier investments, or?
Could be that they're taking less risk, that they perform better. There's research out there that shows, better corporate social responsibility leads to better performance in different industries. It's not clear cut though, but that could be one of the reasons. And looking at not just from the banking side, but also just in general, companies that have better social responsibility, do they get their funding at a lower cost than other companies? So is their debt, is it cheaper, right? Do they pay a lower interest rate on the debt that they receive? If they sell stock, right? Is the required return on that stock less for a company that's considered a better social participant?
What role is leadership in it? Like you've looked at this over time, so some companies become more socially responsible, and I assume some become less. Is it changes in the board of directors, changes in the CEO, changes in the environment? Is there something to point to?
No, I wish there was, because then we could all say, okay, do this and you will be a better corporate citizen. But it's like I said, a lot of this is a little bit messy, right? There's a lot of things going on, and I'm sure, of course it has to do with who's at the top, what kind of environment are they setting for their employees, what kind of leadership do we have? I'm sure that makes a difference, and some of it is reflected in the corporate social responsibility. So if you have a more diverse board, for instance, either males and females or ethnicity or whatever it might be, that's considered higher on the scale,
yeah.
right, than otherwise. So, you know, does one thing lead to another? Does the other lead the other way? It's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, the chicken and egg type of
Yeah.
argument when you're getting into some of those areas.
Right, right.
Okay. Liz, we've got less than 2 minutes left. Where's the future of the research headed?
I mean, I think I'm going to continue on. I mean, there's so much to do on the financial crisis in particular. That's most in finance. A lot of people are thinking about that topic because we don't want it to happen again. So everybody is looking at, okay, what were the causes? Who made it through okay? Who didn't? Why? Right? So there's a lot of issues there, from commercial banks to investment banks. What kind of involvement did each group have? So, yeah, I mean, it's nothing specific, but
So
there's a lot there.
It's really lessons learned and
Yes.
how we can avoid those mistakes and those pitfalls
I think so.
again.
I think so.
Are you incorporating both the leadership and compensation and social responsibility? I mean, is it all coming together, or?
Yeah, I'm actually doing something with, so one of the papers we're looking at corporate social responsibility and compensation. So, you know, what kind of, you know, structure, is there a particular compensation structure that we see at better performing corporate citizens than others? And does that, I mean, it'd be fine if we saw a relationship, but does it actually lead to better performance in the firm? That's actually the most important thing.
The bottom
to find,
line, right? Because it still is business.
So we can see the relationships, but we want to know, you know, what does that mean?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
My guest has been Dr. Elizabeth Cooper, Associate Professor in the Department of Finance at LaSalle School of Business. I'm Joe Marbach, the Provost at LaSalle University. Thank you for watching.